Clara's phone vibrated just as she stepped into a conference room. The caller ID flashed Greenwood Secure Storage ***. She answered immediately. Ms. Harper, the manager's voice was barely above a whisper. I think you need to come here. Her stomach tightened. What happened? Your parents are outside Unit C214. Silence. They're demanding access. Your father says the unit belongs to the family. Your mother keeps insisting we're hiding their property. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Have they touched my unit? Another pause. We stopped them once, but they brought bolt cutters. Across the room, coworkers continued setting up for the meeting, completely unaware that Clara's entire plan had just reached its final stage. The manager lowered his voice even further. Police are on the way. Clara didn't gasp. She didn't panic. Instead, she asked, are your security cameras recording every angle? Oh, yes. Good. The manager sounded confused. Ma'am, aren't you worried? Clara picked up her car keys. No. Outside, tires screeched across the parking lot as she rushed toward her car. For years, Richard and Diane had believed one thing about their daughter. That she would always forgive them. Always give in. Always choose peace over confrontation. They had spent decades treating every boundary she created as a challenge instead of a right. If she bought something, they wanted to inspect it. If she received mail, they wanted to open it. If she earned more money, they wanted to know exactly where every dollar went. Even after moving out, the questions never stopped. What are you hiding? Why are you being secretive? What kind of daughter keeps things from her own parents? She had answered each accusation the same way. My private life is mine. That answer only fueled their obsession. Then, 3 days earlier, everything changed. During a visit to their house, Clara had taken what sounded like an ordinary phone call. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't acted suspicious. She simply said, yes, everything important is still secured inside the storage unit. Nothing more. But she noticed something. Her father stopped flipping through the television channels. Her mother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. One glance between them said everything. They had finally found something they couldn't stop thinking about. Since then, their questions had become strangely specific. What storage company do you use? How much does a unit cost? They let family members inside, don't they? Clara answered none of them, because she wanted them to make the next move. Now, as she sped across town, another call came through. She answered on speaker. The manager sounded breathless. Ma'am. A loud metallic crash echoed through the phone. Your father just cut the lock. Richard had always believed persistence could unlock anything. That afternoon, it had brought him to a locked storage facility across town. Clara knew because the facility manager texted her a screenshot before she arrived. Her father stood outside Unit C214 with bolt cutters hanging at his side. Her mother stood beside him, pointing at the office window while arguing with 2 employees. Clara drove without turning on the radio. For the first time in years, she wasn't wondering what her parents might do. She already knew. Their relationship hadn't always been like this. When Clara was younger, Richard called it protecting the family. When she earned her first paycheck, he insisted she deposit it into an account he monitored. It'll teach you responsibility, he said. Instead, every purchase required an explanation. Every withdrawal became an interrogation. When she received letters from her university, Diane opened them before Clara got home. We're your parents, she'd say with a shrug. There shouldn't be secrets. Later came promotions. Raises. Bonuses. Each achievement somehow became another reason they believed they deserved access to her finances. If you're doing well, Richard often reminded her, Then the family should benefit. Whenever Clara hesitated, she became the selfish daughter. The ungrateful daughter. The daughter who had forgotten where she came from. So when she finally rented a storage unit years earlier, she never mentioned it. Not once. Whenever Diane asked, "Why are you paying for storage?" Clara simply smiled. "Just personal things." Richard hated that answer. "Personal from your parents?" She nodded. Yes. Moving into her own apartment hadn't changed them. If anything, it made them more determined. They searched for clues every time they visited. Richard casually glanced through unopened mail sitting on her kitchen counter. Diane wandered into rooms Clara hadn't invited her to enter. Questions became routine. Did you buy a new car? Did you invest in something? Did Grandma leave you anything before she died? Every answer Clara refused to give became proof, in their minds, that she was hiding something valuable. They never considered another possibility. That she simply wanted privacy. Then Clara received the phone call from her attorney. "The document review is finished," he said. "You've confirmed everything. Every record, every transfer, every signature. And the facility. They've upgraded surveillance exactly as requested." Clara looked through the dining room doorway. Her parents were only a few feet away. "Perfect." She deliberately spoke just loudly enough. "Good," she replied. "Everything important is still secured inside the storage unit." Silence filled the room. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. When she finally raised her eyes, Richard and Diane weren't looking at her. They were looking at each other. Neither smiled. Neither spoke. But Clara recognized the expression instantly. Curiosity. Greed. Determination. The trap had been sprung. Over the next 2 days, their behavior changed. Richard suddenly asked which side of town she drove through after work. Diane casually mentioned that self-storage businesses had terrible security. Later that evening, Diane sent a text. "Storage companies lose valuables all the time. You should let your father inspect yours." Clara ignored it. The next morning, Richard called. "If something happens to you," he said, "how would we even know what's inside?" "I suppose you wouldn't." He laughed. "You've always been stubborn." "No," Clara answered calmly. "I've just learned." The line went quiet. Hours later, Richard made one final comment before hanging up. "Secrets always come out eventually." Clara stared at her phone after the call ended. Then she quietly whispered to herself, "I know." The storage facility parking lot looked more like the scene of a neighborhood dispute than a private business. A half-dozen people had stopped to watch. 2 customers stood beside their cars. A delivery driver leaned against his truck. Several phones were already pointed toward the entrance. Richard didn't seem to care. He stood in front of the office window, pointing at the employee behind the glass. "That's my daughter's unit," he shouted. "Everything she owns belongs to this family." Inside the office, the manager kept his voice calm. "Sir, only the account holder may enter. My daughter gave me permission. Then she can call us herself." Richard slammed his palm against the counter. "You people are helping her hide our property." Beside him, Diane raised her phone and began recording. "Everyone needs to see how this company treats elderly parents," she announced loudly. "They're protecting stolen family assets." Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. One customer quietly muttered, "If it's her unit, why would they let anyone else in?" Diane spun toward him. "You don't know the whole story." "No," the customer replied. "Neither do you." Inside the office, the manager discreetly sent a message to Clara's attorney. Attempted unauthorized access. Situation escalating. Security footage preserved. Less than a minute later, The reply arrived. Continue recording. Do not interfere unless safety requires it. Police have already been notified. The manager looked back toward the monitors. Every camera was capturing the confrontation from multiple angles. Exactly as the attorney had requested weeks earlier. Outside, Richard's patience disappeared. I've wasted enough time. He marched toward his pickup truck. One employee stepped outside. Sir, please don't. Richard opened the truck bed and lifted out a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. Several people gasped. The employee immediately backed away. Sir, damaging company property is a criminal offense. Richard kept walking. No, he snapped. Protecting my family's property isn't. Deanne followed closely behind. Just cut it, she urged. Once we open the unit, everyone will understand. A teenager standing nearby quietly started recording. So they're actually doing it. Within seconds, 2 more phones appeared. The entire confrontation was now being filmed from multiple angles. Richard reached Unit C214. He grabbed the padlock. The metal jaws of the bolt cutters closed around it. For one brief second, everything went quiet. Then, crack. The sound echoed through the hallway. The lock bent, but didn't completely break. Another employee immediately pulled down the security gate leading into the row of units. Everyone out. Richard yanked at the damaged lock again. It almost gave. Before he could swing the cutters a second time, the automatic security doors sealed the hallway. A loud alarm began echoing throughout the building. Red emergency lights flashed overhead. Deanne looked around nervously for the first time. What did you just trigger? Richard frowned. It doesn't matter. But it clearly did. Outside, several witnesses were already giving statements to arriving officers. The manager stepped forward holding printed account records. One officer accepted them before looking toward Richard. Then he asked the question that instantly changed the entire confrontation. Who is the legal owner of Storage Unit C214? Clara pulled into the parking lot just as another patrol car arrived. Blue lights reflected across the rows of storage buildings. Her parents stood near the entrance, no longer shouting quite as confidently. Richard still held the bolt cutters. Deanne crossed her arms the moment she saw Clara. There she is, she snapped. Tell them we're your parents. Clara shut her car door and walked toward the officers without answering. One officer stepped forward. Are you Clara Harper? Yes. Do you rent Unit C214? I do. Are either of these individuals authorized to access it? She looked directly at her parents. No. The answer landed harder than anyone expected. Richard laughed once. Don't be ridiculous. He turned toward the officers. She's emotional. We're family. The officer didn't react. I asked a legal question, sir. Richard's smile faded. The facility manager handed over a tablet displaying security footage. Everything has been recorded. Another employee added a folder containing printed access logs. They demanded access several times before attempting to cut the lock. The officer reviewed the timestamps. So they were repeatedly informed they weren't authorized. Yes. And then the lock was damaged. Correct. Richard immediately interrupted. It wasn't theft. It was my daughter's unit. I wasn't stealing anything. Clara finally spoke. You weren't trying to enter your daughter's unit. You were trying to enter mine. Silence settled over the group. Deanne stepped closer. What are you hiding? If it's nothing valuable, open it. Richard nodded. Exactly. If you're innocent, prove it. Several witnesses turned toward Clara. Even the officers waited. The storage unit had become the center of everyone's attention. Whatever was inside had fueled an entire afternoon of chaos. Clara reached into her purse. Instead of producing a key, she handed one officer a business card. "My attorney should be here any minute." Richard scoffed. "A lawyer? For a storage unit?" The officer looked at the card. "You expected legal representation." Before Clara could answer, a black sedan entered the parking lot. A middle-aged attorney stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He approached calmly. "I'm Daniel Foster, counsel for Ms. Harper." Richard rolled his eyes. "Oh, this is getting dramatic." The attorney ignored him. He handed the responding officer a prepared packet. Inside were certified copies of previous harassment reports, written notices sent to the storage facility, and legal correspondence documenting repeated attempts by Richard and Diane to obtain unauthorized access to Clara's private property. The officer slowly turned the pages. "These reports go back almost 2 years." "They do," the attorney replied. "So today's incident wasn't unexpected." "No. It was anticipated." Richard's expression changed instantly. "What are you talking about?" The attorney looked directly at him. "Ms. Harper informed us months ago that if you ever learned this unit existed, there was a significant chance you would attempt to enter it." Diane stared at Clara. "You planned this?" Clara remained calm. "I prepared for it." The officer looked back toward the damaged lock. "So the additional surveillance. The upgraded cameras, preserved recordings, and notification procedures," the attorney said, "were all requested before today's incident." Richard suddenly realized every angry word, every threat, every swing of the bolt cutters had been preserved from multiple angles. For the first time all afternoon, he looked genuinely nervous. The officer carefully closed the legal file. "I'll need those bolt cutters as evidence." Richard hesitated before handing them over. Another officer photographed the damaged lock. Then he turned toward Clara. "Ms. Harper, if you're willing, we'd like you to unlock the storage unit so we can document its contents in relation to this investigation." Every person in the hallway stopped moving. Richard leaned forward. Diane held her breath. The witnesses lowered their phones, waiting. Clara reached into her handbag. She wrapped her fingers around the storage key and slowly stepped toward Unit C-214. Clara stood in front of Unit C-214. The hallway was completely silent. Behind her, 2 police officers waited with evidence cameras. The storage facility manager stood beside the damaged lock. Her attorney opened a legal notebook. Richard folded his arms. Diane stared at the door with impatient excitement. "This is where all the lies end," Richard muttered. Clara looked at him for a moment before sliding the key into the new temporary lock security had installed after removing the damaged one. The latch clicked. She slowly rolled the metal door upward. Everyone leaned forward. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, no gold bars, no expensive jewelry, no hidden safe. Instead, metal shelving lined both walls. Every shelf held identical gray archive boxes. Each box carried neatly printed labels: estate records, financial transfers, property documents, identity records, audio evidence, correspondence. The excitement disappeared from Richard's face. Diane frowned. "What?" She stepped closer. "What is all this?" Clara didn't answer. She walked to the first shelf and removed one archive box. "This," she said quietly, "is why I rented this unit." Her attorney placed the box on a folding table brought over by facility staff. He opened it carefully. Inside were certified copies of probate records from Clara's late grandmother's estate. Property deeds, inheritance distributions, bank statements. Every page carried official seals. The attorney handed several documents to the responding officer. These establish the original ownership history. Richard looked confused. What does any of that have to do with us? The attorney pulled out another folder. Everything. He opened it. These statements show inheritance funds deposited into accounts opened under Ms. Harper's name. He turned another page. They were then transferred into accounts controlled by Richard Harper. Richard immediately shook his head. That's ridiculous. The attorney calmly produced certified banking records. They're authenticated. Diane took a step backward. Another archive box was opened. Inside were years of financial statements, utility payments, mortgage receipts, insurance premiums. Every payment Clara had quietly made on behalf of her parents. The officer flipped through several pages. You paid these. For almost 8 years, Clara answered. My parents told everyone they supported me. She looked around the hallway. They never mentioned I was paying their bills. Richard's voice rose. We're family. You wanted to help. I did, Clara replied. But helping isn't the same as being used. The attorney opened a third box. Inside sat several digital recorders, carefully labeled flash drives, bound notebooks. Diane stared at them. What are those? My journals. Clara answered without hesitation. I wrote after every major financial conversation. The attorney picked up one recorder. With advice from previous counsel, Ms. Harper legally preserved conversations in which she believed financial coercion was occurring. Richard's eyes widened. You recorded us. When the conversations involved my finances, yes. The attorney pressed play on one recording. Richard's voice filled the hallway. If you really loved this family, you'd transfer the account before anyone else sees it. Another recording followed. Diane's voice. Don't tell anyone your grandmother left you money. We'll handle it. No one spoke. The silence became heavier than any argument. The final archive box contained identity records, credit applications, tax correspondence, account opening forms. The attorney laid several documents side by side. The signatures appear to belong to Ms. Harper. He slid another certified report forward. Forensic handwriting analysis confirms they do not. The officer slowly read the conclusion. So accounts were opened without her authorization. Correct. Using her identity. Richard's shoulders sagged. For the first time all afternoon, he had nothing to say. The officers photographed every shelf before closing the boxes. One officer turned toward Richard. Based on today's incident and the evidence we've reviewed, additional investigators will be assigned. Another officer addressed Diane. You'll both receive instructions regarding future interviews. Neither protested. Neither argued. They simply stood there, staring at the shelves they had expected would make them rich. Instead, they had walked directly into years of documented evidence against themselves. News of the attempted break-in spread through the extended family within days. At first, several relatives defended Richard and Diane. They're your parents. They must have had a reason. Then Clara's attorney shared the court-approved financial records during the civil proceedings. Relatives who had believed Richard and Diane for years quietly changed their opinions. Several called Clara personally. One uncle apologized for never believing her. A cousin admitted she finally understood why Clara had become so private. Even relatives who chose not to speak publicly stopped defending her parents. For the first time, Clara wasn't standing alone. The criminal case moved forward. The attempted forced entry. The damaged lock. Witness statements. Security footage. Every detail strengthened the existing civil claims involving her inheritance and financial exploitation. Richard and Diane spent months responding to investigators instead of demanding explanations from Clara. Legal fees mounted. Their reputation within the family deteriorated. More importantly, they could no longer control the narrative. The documents did that for them. Several months later, Clara returned to the storage facility one final time. The archive boxes were loaded into a secure records service under her attorney's supervision. The evidence no longer needed a rented unit. It belonged in protected legal custody. She signed the final paperwork. The manager smiled. "I hope I never have to make another phone call like that." Clara smiled back. "I hope you don't either." She handed over the keys, closed the account, and walked away without looking back. Not long afterward, she purchased a home. Only her attorney and a few trusted friends knew the address. There were no surprise visits, no demands, no interrogations, only peace. Standing on the front porch of her new home, Clara finally understood something she hadn't realized when she rented that storage unit years earlier. It had never been built to hide her secrets. It had protected the truth until the day her parents chose to expose themselves. And in trying to break into that unit, they had unlocked the consequences of their own choices.